Welcome to the Women in Vinyl podcast with Jenn DiEugenio, founder of Women in Vinyl, and contributor Robyn Raymond. This podcast facilitates conversations with those working in the vinyl record industry to educate, demystify, and diversify the vinyl community.
Thank you for tuning in to another Tech Talk on the Women in Vinyl podcast. On this episode, we will be discussing the state of the industry and have a very special guest to do so, Katy Clove of Merge Records. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yay, Katy! You're definitely one of my favorite people in the entire industry. So,
thank you.
I'm really pumped that you're here. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm excited as well.
I mean, not only are you a gifted artiste and photographer, but I mean, you also know what the shit you're talking about, so that helps too.
Seriously.
Seriously.
But yeah, we've been seeing a lot on social media about pressing delays. I'm sure people are getting emails about records not shipping on time. And I'm hearing a lot that it's record store day and major labels. So during this chat, we hope to shed some light on why these delays are really happening, what's causing them, and some ideas if you're a band or a small label on how to get your record pressed right now. So, Katy, for those that don't know you, why don't you tell everybody about who you are and what Merge is?
So my name's Katy Clove. I am the production manager at Merge Records. Merge has been around for 31 years now. We are based in Durham, North Carolina. The label was started by Mac McCon and Laura Balance, who are also members of Superchunk. And yeah, we're a small independent label. There are about, I think, 18 of us who work there. And I am in charge of all of anything to do with production. So scheduling, budgeting, working with vendors, pressing plants, both for vinyl and CD, but vinyl is what we're here to talk about. So, yeah.
I mean, it would be kind of good for you to shed some light on CDs too, I think, because there's been a lot of like anti-vinyl talk and like, woohoo, CDs. So it's always nice to have a bit of a balanced approach. So I feel
so from a production standpoint, CDs are really easy right now. Yes. At least for us, we work with ADS. They're really great. And I mean, for CDs, we can get CDs usually within 3 to 4 weeks. So it's really not been an issue. However, vinyl is selling, it's just a much stronger sell right now than CDs. CDs are still, we sell a fair amount in Europe, but in terms of domestic sales, it's definitely, we sell a lot more vinyl. So yeah, that's been a shift. I mean, over the last, I'd say probably 8 years or so.
And do you think that's more like catalog based, like because of the catalog that you have and the artists that you have, like they're more vinyl specific or vinyl friendly?
Actually, I not so much. I mean, I think some are more vinyl friendly than others, and certainly we have artists who prefer vinyl, but we also have some artists who they really prefer CDs and they collect CDs, not vinyl. Yeah. It just seems to be, it's sort of consumer demand. It also, there's some more flexibility with vinyl, the whole like color exclusives, indie exclusives, band and tour exclusives. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later and how that's affected vinyl turnaround.
Yeah, I see a lot
But
of
yeah.
metal labels still doing CDs pretty frequently.
Oh, interesting.
It was funny. We were getting I was helping someone with their CD, and we were talking to a vendor, and the vendor was like, "We're really behind. We're really busy. It's going to take like 14 days to complete it." I was like, "Ooh, try months."
14 days, bless your heart.
I'm like, "Let me tell you."
And Hughes was frantic at that moment. He's like, "Oh, you guys, let me tell you, 14 days. Are you ready?"
If only. Jeez.
I love that. I love that so much. So, I mean, from your production perspective, and I mean, this is the best part because Jenn actually works at a plant. Katy, you have the other side, and then I have the side that's like being infringed upon now that pressing plants are so busy. So I really like this. I get to understand a little bit more too. But from both of you, I mean, what are the actual issues that you're finding, Jenn, at the plant level that you're experiencing? And then how does that correlate into the production side with Katy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. You know, we've discussed before how 2020 just really started the ball rolling between, you know, Apollo fire and then COVID. And so the shutdowns were really sort of the first thing after everybody sort of felt like they got back on their feet from Lacquers. And, you know, because a lot of plating facilities had to shut down and a lot of pressing plants don't have plating facilities in them. So when those opened back up, there was a backlog of all that work that couldn't get done. So that was sort of the first thing. And then as things started to sort of get rolling again, then there became shortages of actual PVC. So certain colors were harder to get. Now copolymer, which is part of the PVC compound, is hard to get. And something I don't think people think about is PVC obviously isn't just being used for records. So there is a lot more processing that goes into the PVC for vinyl because we expect it to do something different than your vinyl flooring does. So there's an issue there too because a lot of people are also remodeling their homes and stuff during this time also. So that shortage is causing a lot of issues. And then time, right? Because there's not as many flights going back and forth, and a lot of pressing plants get their PVC from Europe. So if things are having to go by boat, that's going to take a lot longer. It's more expensive if they're going by air. So, I mean, yeah, it's just been one thing after the other. And then demand. Everybody wants their records. So, yeah.
And wants them right now.
Yes.
But so with that, and with the polymer problem, is that with all colors? Is that like just a basic molecule of the PVC compound that you need? So regardless of color that you would do, even if it's just a black record,
Exactly.
you would still need. Okay. So
yeah.
Just like, so that everybody understands, like, it's like, oh, well, if everybody just wanted orange records, we'd be fine.
Right. And, you know,
not everybody wants orange records also.
And the PVC companies are having to raise their prices, so, which means we in turn are having to raise our prices, which not just us specifically, but a lot of plants are having to do that. And I've seen, you know, some labels say that people are price gouging and things like that. And really, you know, truly, we're just having to cover costs right now to get things done. So
yeah, we've everybody that we have worked with, that we currently work with, have raised prices, and we certainly don't feel like anyone is price gouging. We've taken it all in stride and totally understand where it's coming from. And in fact, there have been a couple of instances where I've sort of reached out to plants who were a little bit behind. I was like, aren't you guys, you know, you haven't really raised your prices in a few years.
So honest of you.
I want to make sure, you know, we're fair here. Like, and they admitted, they were like, yeah, we're trying. We just are so backed up. You know, we haven't gotten around to actually sending out the grid. But
yeah, I think it's interesting, you know, because so many consumers don't understand in the way that messaging is going out. How are you guys handling messaging about delays?
Well, I don't deal with our like direct to consumer. Our mail order department deals with those emails. And then we've, I think we've included a note on our website with all of our pre-orders, letting people know just that things, we intend to ship on or around release date as soon as we have the vinyl available. For me, it's more about communicating with the artists, figuring out, firming up due dates for mastering and artwork. So in the beginning of 2020, there was a lot more education involved because it was still kind of, it hadn't really gotten to the artists yet. They didn't realize, or they thought it was sort of an isolated thing with certain labels or certain plants. Now it's gotten a lot easier where I feel like the word has gotten out. Everyone understands for the most part. But it's still, it's hard to explain to artists why they need to get me masters 4 months earlier than we originally told them. But for the most part, they've all taken it all in stride and adapted pretty well.
I think that's a great point too, because so prior to 2020, when you were planning releases, what kind of timeline did that look like? When you were like, okay, like when does the vinyl discussion begin in the label side of things? Like, are you just like, hey, everybody, let's make a record. Okay, we're going to do CDs and this and this and this and this, and then they go into the studio? Or is it like, hey, we made this really bitchin' record. Now what do we do with it?
A little bit of both. Actually,
I feel like that's so right.
Yeah, a little bit of both. We certainly have artists who, a year in advance, they're like, we're going to be working on this record. Let's start talking about a release date. And then we certainly have instances, and this will just always be the case, where one of our artists is like, hey, I did this, or I want to do this next month. When can we squeeze it in?
Surprise.
Yeah. We try to accommodate both, but before all of this, our sort of typical, I think, turnaround was from the beginning, from mastering to street date, was 7 months now. And people would freak out over that. When we would talk to artists, they were just like, oh my God, I want this out, next month. Why does it take so long? And even some of the people like within the label would be like, why does it, they think of that as just, it's production, like it's at the pressing plant for that long. That's not the case.
Just waiting.
Yeah, distribution needs stock. Now it's even earlier, but for international distribution, we need stock to them 4 to 6 weeks. Now it's become more like 8 weeks in advance. So you're already cutting a month to 2 out there. So now you're looking at more like 4 to 5 months. Mastering, we're looking at the schedule from basically the receipt of production masters to, and that's when I'm going to order lacquers, to, our street date. So that's what that 7-month span is. But, mastering and getting lacquers together, even before the lacquer shortage, you're still looking at 3 weeks or so. Test pressings, maybe 4 weeks. And then we would allow a pretty generous amount of time for test pressing approval. We've had to shorten that quite a bit. And fortunately, we rarely ever have issues. But when there is an issue, there's not a lot of, wiggle room built in anymore. Whereas we used to always make sure we had at least 4 weeks for approval, so that if there were any questions, we could answer them. We could listen to multiple copies, I always listen, make sure there's no obvious, like there's no manufacturing issues, and then I send it to the artist for approval. And of course you have to factor in the shipping and the time for shipping and all of that. So there's just, as you know, there's so many pieces that go into that 6 to 7 months. Now we're having to schedule out more like 8 to 12 months. And when possible, we are trying to err on too much time rather than too little, knowing that some artists are just not going to be able to meet that, and that's we'll try and we'll be flexible and figure things out as we go along. But then some artists are ahead of schedule, and as long as we kind of have a balance of the two, things seem to be working out okay. We have what we need by street date generally.
How
That's awesome.
has it been with getting lacquers cut? Have you seen a backlog there as well?
Now, but to be honest, at the beginning, like right after the Apollo fire, and actually for probably about a year after that, we weren't really seeing any issues. The people that we work with, and we work with quite a few different lacquer cutters, but there are 3 or 4 that we work with most consistently, and they weren't getting their lacquers from Apollo to begin with. So they weren't really, they weren't too concerned about it yet. And we didn't have any issue. They were able to cut and ship lacquers the same week. In the last, I'd say 4 months, that's changed. We now, there have been several instances where I've had to wait 2 months because they just were out of stock. In some cases I can reach out to, another lacquer cutter. But it's just, it's becoming more and more of an issue across the board.
And has that factored into any of your conversations where you guys think that you might move something from being cut in lacquer to being DMM cut?
No, we work with one plant who, based in Canada, who do a lot of DMM, and they encourage that. We are pretty much exclusively lacquer. Yeah. I had the opportunity at one point, this was soon after I started in this position at Merge, so 5 years ago, where I was able to have a record cut to lacquer and one DMM and compare them. Yeah. And they both sounded good, to be honest. I think, as you know, it really it depends on the music. But the lacquer definitely sounded a little warmer. I don't know. Yeah, we haven't made and don't really want to make that switch to DMM. We're not like strictly anti DMM, but yeah.
I mean, it's always a funny thing to see kind of the division between, North American production and overseas production, and like what makes a record sound good, and like what we think versus what they think. And
we also can't get it.
Yeah, exactly. But that 1-to-1 is also like really amazing that you were able to hear the same record cut in 2 different processes. And Jen got a chance to hang out with Jet and do the same thing with a record. And I mean, I've done kind of a similar thing, but more so like with a lathe cut and a lacquer cut, and listening to the test press and like just like validating my own picky processes. So I mean, but that 1-to-1 is such a incredibly like validating experience, so that we're not all lacquer snobs, guys. So it's like it's nice for you to say that you've done it too. There's just some music that translates better, and maybe again that's a catalog thing, and it's like the roster of artists that you have. And I mean, Merge has a huge, gigantic roster and like very dynamic individuals. It's very awesome. So but I mean, it's definitely not like techno, and it's not ambient music, and it's not like music made by like non-analog things, right? So I mean, I always factor that in when it's like a DMM versus lacquer conversation. But it's good to know that the lacquer thing is really starting to show its ugly head everywhere.
You all don't do a ton of different colors and versions, do you, for like indie and various releases?
Well, historically we didn't, but actually it's becoming more and more common. We don't, everyone is conscious of the issues with that, and we try to limit it to maybe at most 3 or 4, which still feels like a lot. But I've seen instances with other labels where they've done 8 to 10, which just sounds outrageous to me. But
it's too many.
We do, as of, gosh, I think we started it 4 months ago, 4 years ago. I'm sorry. This is what COVID has done to time.
That's exactly it. That was a perfect analogy right there.
Oh my God. 4 years ago, we started doing what we call peak vinyl. So for almost every release, we have black, and then we press a limited amount to a color, usually a single color, and we call that peak vinyl. And once that sells out, it's done. So those tend to, the goal is to sell those out during pre-order. So we almost always have at least one color version. But it has become more common for us to have to do exclusive colors with our indie partners. Sometimes the band will want to have a tour exclusive color. And we try to accommodate those to some extent, but we also try and discourage too much.
Yeah.
Did the idea of a tour exclusive kind of go away over the last year and a half?
It actually, it sort of, well, yes, it did. Sorry. Yeah, it did. Yeah. But what kind of took its place was, as bands and their management were trying to figure out ways to increase revenue when they weren't touring, is they would come up with exclusives for their store, for like their band store. So,
oh, that's awesome.
So it was kind of replaced with that.
Yeah.
Did you find that your bands were doing a lot more like recording with all of the free time that they had in their hands?
No, actually, because so many people were quarantining, or they weren't getting together to record.
Right.
So no, actually, a lot of that slowed down, along with everything else.
Yeah, because I was gonna say from the color standpoint, I think there's an idea that the color itself is maybe taking longer, but those switchovers when you have several different versions of a record can be something that would potentially increase your time.
Exactly.
And then some of those colors are harder to get too now. So there's no rhyme or reason that I've seen. It's just some are delayed, some are harder to get. And so I think for bands or small labels, that's something to keep in mind too. We did another panel similar to this, and Sean from Independent was talking about how, some people that he's working with are doing like 12, 10 variations of a release. And like, that is just so time consuming, and then getting those packed out. Sometimes the pack out configurations are different. Sometimes they'll have like an OB or a different sticker. So that all adds to your time as well.
I mean, and just like the time down to clean out a hopper and get that color change over. I mean, I love a weird mishmash of compound. Like, I love it when there's like a weird bleed from like the end, like the dregs of whatever was in there before to the new color. Like,
sometimes those are gorgeous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, but nobody wants those ones.
Right.
Like the production people don't want those ones. Like, everybody's like, ooh, this is so cool. But like, you're not going to see those ones ever. But yeah, it's crazy because like, you're going to run that PVC out for like, 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. Like, if you're going like clear to black or black to clear, especially because you don't want any of the like crossover pollutant remnant in either of those, because it's going to create a non-desirable effect, right? So if everybody just pressed more black records, then it would be fine, right? That's how that works. Less downtime because it's all just one color. I wonder if there's any plants that are just going to be like all black, where we're just like, we don't do any colors, we just do black records. That's all we do.
Someone's gonna get frustrated enough and just be like, that's it.
Yeah. Right. Like, they're just like, nope, we're taking a stand. Like, I salute you, whoever you are in the future. I love it. They're going to weigh every single record. It's going to be exactly like 155 grams, and it's going to be black, and that's it. It's like the original Ford. You can get it in any color as long as it's black.
Right.
You're welcome.
Well, and it's funny too to think about that standardization. This is sort of off topic, but some of the bootleg Black Sabbath records that I have from Korea, they used to just take a plain white label and then type in whoever like the band was. So it's literally like typewritten on the label. So it's like,
That's my dream.
If we really were going to simplify the process.
You're speaking to my heart right now. I love that. I'm literally trying to find like an old school Underwood vintage, like 1945 typewriter, like hoping that there's like flaws in the keys so that I can like type out labels. That's
like Lion Man is on the instead of Iron Man. It's great.
Children of the what was it? Children of the oh man.
Yeah, there's some funny typo on that one. Yeah.
That one was a good one.
Well, and so print, are you finding any delays there as well?
Yes. That had not really been much of an issue for quite a while. But actually just recently, I heard from our vendor and they let us know that, what was typically taking around 2 weeks is taking more like 5 to 6. So we've definitely started factoring that in. Honestly, it's funny because by the time, I got that message, I was like 4 to 6 weeks. Oh, no problem. Like that's nothing.
Right. Well, and some of our case wrapped friends too are taking, quite some time. Or like tip-on jackets. So, and I got a turn time on one of those and I was like, no worries. We're all good.
This is fine. Everything is fine.
Yeah.
So you're not in charge of like any of the messaging out, but is there like a communication stream between production and like social media or the people that are kind of dealing with it? Or is it like band specific or management specific where you're like, don't say anything about this until it's in your hot little hands, you dummies, because that's like literally my biggest pet peeve of all time. And it makes me so nuts. And I don't know how many times I have to tell people. I'm just like, wait till you get your records before you say anything about them.
Right.
Like you can say, pre-sale, party. But how is that getting explained in your world? Are you putting that on the bands or is that like a label type conversation?
No, it's definitely within the label. We communicate that with the bands and their management, but one thing, one shift has been that while we always sort of aspired to this, we got away with not having to do it, and now we're doing it more and more, which is not announcing a release until we have approved test pressings. That's certainly the ideal. I've always felt that was what we should be striving for. We should not announce anything until we had approved test pressings, but we just got away with not having to do that. And we were just always under so much pressure from the band and the management. They wanted to get the word out. And also, we have a whole publicity and marketing campaign to schedule. So that also takes months of advanced planning. So it's definitely, there's so much to juggle. But we are getting more and more strict about telling bands up front, we're not going to announce this until we have an approved test pressing. And it kind of, it puts the pressure on them too, to just get things moving quickly and stay on top of things. And it seems so far to be working out okay.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's such good advice, because if anything goes wrong, especially with the time it's taking in plating right now, you could be a whole nother month now.
Exactly.
So,
At least. Yeah.
And that test pressing dance is always like a hard thing too, because you want to make sure that everybody that like wants to have a participatory role in the test pressing audit like gets a chance to listen to it, and like as a recommendation on a couple of different turntables.
Right.
I'm just going to say that on behalf of all of the cutting people out there. Please don't judge your test pressings on one listen, because that's not fair to anyone.
Right.
But there's like certain grades of things that will be a pass or fail dependent on, labels, dependent on artists. Are you finding that with the decreased availability of lacquers that you're finding more issues with test pressings, or is that more like
that's a good question,
hit and miss kind of? Because I've seen some discussion on some cutting avenues that people are really finding that there's like some not so great lacquers out there, and they're really having to like try and navigate flaws in lacquers, or like cut things that they really don't want to pass, when they're just like, oh, I don't, this one just has like a higher noise floor than is regularly acceptable for us, but it kind of like backs against the wall, they need this, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like forcing their hand. Does that play, like, are you seeing that come through all the way to your side too?
Not so much there. I will say, but it's the sort of thing where we're talking about just like one or two instances, and maybe it's just a fluke. It has nothing to do with anything else. But we have recently had a couple of test pressings come to us, and there's been like an obvious flaw right off the bat that probably, when I went back to the plant, they were like, oh God, that should not have gone out. Like we like that got through QA and it shouldn't have, which I attribute to, that makes sense. Like everybody is under pressure, overworked, and that's bound to happen. But honestly, it's not, certainly not. I mean, we're really only talking about one or two instances in the last 8 months.
Or 8 days or 8 weeks.
Yeah, definitely 8 months, not 8 years. Which wouldn't even warrant mention.
Even though it feels like 8 years, but yes.
So how are you all handling represses and catalog work? Because I know that is something people are having to consider up front too. If you are putting out a release and it sells out, that's great, but your repress maybe next year. So
exactly.
You're not allowed.
Yeah. So that has been a huge issue, is both repressing for titles that sell out, new titles that sell out faster than we anticipated, as well as catalog, because we are constantly repressing catalog titles. And it took us a while, but I feel like I guess time will tell, but we've kind of gotten a handle on it so early on in COVID, as vinyl sales started to take off, we were definitely the first few new titles that we were releasing, we sold out much faster than we anticipated. And we're kind of alarmed, like, oh God, we've got to get this repressed immediately, and it's going to take longer. So we weathered that, but we were also finding that we were selling out of all of our catalog titles much faster. And that when we went to schedule a repress, rather than looking at 4 to 6 weeks, we could be looking at 8 months or a year. So what we did this last spring is our chief financial officer, who's my boss, and our retail manager went through our entire catalog, everything that's in print, put together a spreadsheet, looked at sales trends, and projected, and based on past sales trends as well as current, how quickly things were selling now, went ahead and projected how much stock we would need over the next 12 to 18 months. Now, obviously, that's an inexact science, but doing that, they gave that to me, and then I was able to go through and break everything down by plant and let each plant know what we were looking at, both for new titles, what we would estimate, even though we don't really know what we're going to be releasing for sure for the next 12 to 18 months, we have a general sense of how many new titles we're going to be releasing, and around how much vinyl we're going to need to press.
Oh, that's so proactive. I mean, the idea of that spreadsheet terrifies me on a level that I can't even communicate. That
I can tell you, when I first saw that spreadsheet and saw how normally I'm focusing on, let's say, 6 to 10 titles at a time, and I'm suddenly like, oh my God, I have to be like looking at schedules for like, I mean, dozens and dozens, at once.
Hang on, I need an oxygen tank. What?
Yeah,
It's
I
crazy.
definitely, there was
Yeah.
a moment of panic, like, oh my God. And I'm still, it's my workload has increased so much.
I do have one question, Katie, if you'll indulge me.
Yes.
Okay, so when things sell out really quickly and you're like, oh, we got to repress this, but here's the delay time. Does that affect the number, like the quantity that you're going to? Because you're like, ooh, strike while the iron is hot. We could sell another 500, 1,000 copies, but we have to wait for a year. So we're only going to do like 750. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, does that affect the quantity that you're ultimately going to order? Or do you still kind of be like, yeah, we sold out this fast. I feel like 1,000 people still want this. Go.
Definitely. It definitely affects it. And that is the conversation that our CFO and retail manager are having constantly. I mean, every day, just like, and it's, a lot of it, like I said, it's an inexact science, but we're definitely in general erring a little bit more on pressing more than we think we might need, because in the last year we've seen that's the trend we're seeing. We're selling more than we expect, so we're constantly adjusting, moving forward. And it does seem to be, the second half of the year, we're seeing things, they're still selling, but we're seeing that we seem to be planning ahead better.
Right.
We're not running out as quickly.
Oh man, that's like the one, I think, thing about cutting records one by one in realsies that I really appreciate and love, because bands are like, oh, well, we only sold 24 in our pre-order. And I'm like, great, let's make 24. Here you go. And they're just like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah. And then if you want to make more, it's like a repress idea and we can do that. No problem. But it's like, it's kind of a special moment to be able to be like, here you go. Here's exactly how many you need. And you don't need to carry another 700. You're welcome.
Well, and why don't you talk to that, Robyn? Like, how have you seen impacts on what you do based on everything that we're talking about?
Oh, my sweet Lord. I have never had to say no to people before. I mean, in the very limited time that I've been doing my sweet, sweet job. But now my ass is booked out until the end of the year. And that has never happened. I mean, I love to say, like, I make records accessible and I never say no to anybody because I'm a monster. But now I'm like, I physically don't have enough hours in the day. I've personally tried to project manage myself and I'm the worst. I like spreadsheets and I just don't get along at all. And I'm like, I think I can do this many. And I'm like writing things down and like trying to be like, okay, well, on a really great day, like I would be able to do like this many of this record. And I'm like writing it down in a calendar. And now I'm like into November and I'm like, oh God. And still getting emails every day with people being like, oh, well, can we get 25? And usually I would be like, bingo, no problem. Like, that's like, I can do that in 4 days or whatever. And now I'm just like, how's January? Is that cool? No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because like,
sorry.
Because I have like the rest of the year, early 2022, like pipelines up, like just tabs to try to make sure, like, because I'm working so much closer with all the labels and people that I work with, to be like, okay, I need this in by this date. I need this, by this time. And so, yeah, it's a lot of project management now.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So I like, Katie, is that something that you guys would entertain, like talking to like a lathe cutter or a lo-fi person or like tapes or something to just like try and do something creative that's outside of the stream?
Yes, those conversations are definitely coming up more often. We haven't done any lathe cuts recently. It has come up a couple of times and we've tried to kind of push it, but it just didn't take off with the artist. We have been seeing a lot more cassettes, which, yeah, I'm just not, I just can't get on board with the cassette, but but a lot of people we're being asked to make more and more cassettes.
Yeah,
So,
they're loving those things, man.
Yeah.
The whole tape swap thing has
Yep.
come back with a vengeance, which is it's kind of cool. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember those days. And
I just love beyond the like sound quality. I love which is one of the things I think I love about vinyl is I just love the artwork.
Yes.
I like more real estate for art.
Right.
So a tiny cassette is
what the very first time that I met you, I was sitting beside you at the packaging awards at Making Vinyl.
Yeah.
And you collected an award that day.
That's right. I don't
Yeah.
remember what it was for.
I'm trying to remember because it was something really cool.
Yeah, I know we won an award one year for the His Golden Messenger box set, which was a very, very cool project to work on. But we actually won it for the CD package, which was the same as the vinyl, but
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. I can't remember. I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I like the packaging so much that is something that I would entertain.
So what kind of feedback or suggestion advice would you give for bands, small labels looking right now to put out a record?
Plan as far in advance as possible.
Don't do it.
And I think like be realistic. I mean,
Yes.
So I checked in a little bit with some domestic plants. When we talked to Karen of Gold Rush, she mentioned how during the pandemic she really focused on understanding who their client was. Yeah. And knowing what sort of capacities were best for them. And I think we've also done that. And so I talked to some plants that do take on shorter runs or would be maybe better for bands. So I asked Blue Sprocket, Gold Rush, and Cascade. And for some visibility, they're all looking at early next year. So I think that that's something to just know going in. You know, we get a lot of emails still like, I need this by November, I need this by December. Yeah. And it's just, you're spinning your wheels, you know, just go in knowing it's likely not going to happen. So like Robyn, what would be, I mean, you're booked out through the year. Yeah. Do you are other lathe cutters that you know of the same?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a couple. I have a good friend that actually cuts records in Bulgaria, and he, like a month ago, was out for the year. My good friend Tyler, that was cutting records in Tallahassee, he has moved his studio to Rhode Island. He's out to the end of the year already too, and he's got 2 machines that he can run at the same time, so he's like double what I can do. And like when we spoke, I think he had done over 3,000 something records this year to my meager 1,700. But yeah, I mean, all of the lathe cutters that I know that are like actively, you know, working with labels and stuff, like we're all kind of at max capacity, if not close. It's weird. And we're all like kind of checking in on each other and being like, hey, are you okay? Do you need us to, you know, send you some like life support to granola bars, like Gatorade? Are you okay? So I feel like it's definitely like starting to seep into the lower levels of production that aren't necessarily mass produced, but it's weird, man. It like scares me a little bit because I just like I'm like, okay, well, when is this gonna like cap off, and then just like excitement is going to plummet, and because people are just going to be over it, you know what I mean? They're just gonna like, are there artists for you, Katy, that are just like, well, if we can't get it, then we're not going to do it? Or is everybody still like, hell yeah, records, woo?
Yeah, for the most, not yet. It seems like people are still they've just adapted and they're on board still. I mean, overall, I mean, it's an exciting problem to have. It's frustrating, but it's, you know, it's
good problems.
Yeah, it's allowing, you know, we're looking into more shifts. We're hiring more people, which is expanding the industry. Yeah. You know, we're trying to get more machines. Yeah. And I think, you know, the thing to know is that we can only press records so fast. Robyn can only cut records so fast. Like the machines will only allow so many records to press per minute. And like you want quality records too, right? Because if we send out crappy records so you can get them fast, then everyone's going to be yelling at the labels saying, why is this off center? Why is this warped? Why is, so I think we just all need to, both industry, which I feel like all of us in the industry have really banded together. We're all in this together. But I think from a consumer level, because, we're also collectors, I think the message really needs to be to just be patient and kind and understand, like, everybody's doing their best. Everybody wants you to have your records. Nobody's holding your records hostage. It's the last thing we want to do. So I think that's really important.
We don't want them stuck in a little room. We're not just like holding on to them for fun.
We don't have space. We want them to go.
Well, hey, and Katie, that might be another thing for both of you. Like, because of like extended times, are people like, ooh, let's like jazz it up a little bit more. Like, let's add an OB strip where there was no OB strip, or let's do stickers or something like extra, that's like not in the CD package, but you get it in the vinyl package because you've waited for so long. Like, here's the attaboy.
Yeah, we have seen that, a little bit more
like
of that.
Incentive type things.
Mm-hmm. And we're doing a lot of like merch, things that we can get faster and send people while they're waiting for their record.
What kind of things are you guys doing? Like,
there's the usual like stickers, buttons, patches.
Awesome. I love a
t-shirts.
patch.
We make a lot of t-shirts. I'm trying to think if we haven't done anything really crazy lately. We're always trying to come up with like some crazy idea, but artists actually aren't usually into it.
I don't want a personalized Rubik's Cube.
They're like, no, that's too gimmicky. I don't want that.
So we put this out on Instagram to ask the population base what they thought might be responsible for some of the delays that we're all experiencing. And some of the responses were hysterical. And some of them were, pretty bang on. I feel like the people that follow the Women in Vinyl Instagram account are pretty hip, pretty with it.
Yeah.
Jen, did you have some ones that stuck out to you?
Well, I think one of our favorite is by Crisp Arcs, who says that sharks and frickin' laser beams are the cause.
That one I love too. I feel like that might be a t-shirt for sure. And then there was like a couple that were like a little finger pointy, but might be bang on. And because you're an independent, like you work with independent labels and stuff, Katie, I feel like this one might be a good question for you too with distribution. This person was saying big run exclusives through Walmart put additional demand on limited capacity. Do you think that has any like legitimacy? Like, is it like big labels that are repressing back catalogs or new catalogs or 12 variants of the same record that are, infringing upon capacity of a bunch of plants?
That's a good question, actually. And I honestly think it depends on the plants. And I think Merge is a little unusual in that we actually work with quite a few plants. And that is really just because when I started 5.5 years ago, we were only working with 2, and that coincided with a bunch of new places opening. We were unhappy with one of the ones we were working with. So I just reached out to a lot of different people and established all these relationships. But all of the plants that we work with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, mostly focused on smaller and indie labels. They're not pressing for major labels. And the ones that do, I take their word for it. We've been assured we're not being, bumped to the back of the line because something bigger, they want to press instead.
Right.
And we have long enough, we've had relationships with these people for long enough that I really trust them. The good thing about working with a number of different plants is that we're not in a position where we are having to reach out to presses for the first time and try to, edge in when they're already just overloaded, and in a lot of cases not accepting new clients.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's the case at some plants maybe, but they're not the ones that we're working with. So it hasn't, I don't think that's why things are behind for us.
And I think a lot of plants that have the capability to work with someone that would be pressing for a Walmart or a Target release would typically have enough presses that it's not like the job is running on every single press. So
Exactly.
hopefully, your production manager is working well enough to be able to schedule, a 20,000 piece job on a couple presses, and then your indie label on another press and your small band on another press. So it shouldn't hopefully be taking up someone's entire capacity.
And I feel like that might be one of the biggest misconceptions, that like when a job goes to a plant, it's just like that job until the wheels fall off. But
right.
in actuality, it's like that's exactly right, Jen. Like there's automatic presses that press a single color or whatever and don't need to as much care and attention as something that's doing like a splatter or a variant or something like that are more on the manual side, where so indie jobs will go on the manual presses because it's a less, it's like 100 run or 200 run. And then, what was that kid's name? One of the Jonas kids that did gigantic numbers everywhere. Yeah. I mean, they did thousands and thousands and thousands of those records at Precision when I worked there for a hot minute. So I was just like, this again, some more, really?
But
is this ever going to end?
Well, and things can happen during those runs too. So, if a collar on a stamper splits or something like that, that job could get pulled. So it's hard to really just say like it's the major's fault or it's someone's fault for this. It's really more of the supply chain and COVID and all of that we sort of discussed, and then the demand.
There's only so much room in a factory too, right?
Right. And I think, Record Store Day too is another one that gets brought up often, but I mean, it's not Record Store Day as an entity that's causing the issue.
Yeah.
Labels are putting in for Record Store Day, and then those get allocated to all kinds of different plants. So
absolutely,
it's hard to sort of say that would be a cause either.
I mean, and has that changed over the last few years for you guys too, Katie? Like, what did Record Store Day prep look like for you guys prior to 2020?
We don't do a ton. I mean, we always do something, but like one or two titles, but we don't press a huge amount. And it's not a huge thing for us. But this year we did have to plan ahead a little bit. We had to factor in the extra time for pressing. And we're told by a couple of plants like well in advance, we're being asked to do a ton of stuff for Record Store Day, and kind of a lot of that stuff comes up kind of last minute.
Right.
So we just made sure we planned.
It'll be interesting for next year. Hopefully those are already in.
Yep, I know, exactly. Yeah. I will say we have 2 or 3 titles we're working on that are already in production for Record Store Day next year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The ones that I loved also were from the Duchess Duke, the mail. My last few records sat at the post office for days. my friend Magak Vinyl saying USPS, just throwing them right under the bus. And then my favorite one from Matt Magandi is sneaky posties taking it home for a quick listen first. So I mean, I kind of love all of those ones as well. But I mean, I guess shipping is always kind of a going concern for everybody. I mean, knowing how to pack a record is part of that. We can all attest to seeing the horror show on Instagram and Twitter of Amazon's lack of ability to pack a record. So, but I mean, has that factored into the way that you guys are doing anything, Katie? Like, do you have to, are you changing the way that you're packing records because of the poor shipping couriers and everybody being the most busy people on the planet? And I mean, I am never going to say a bad word about my shipping people. I love my shippers. My UPS guy, Kevin, is the best. I mean, that guy would carry things in bubble wrap for me if he could. I mean, they're like, those guys are working their butts off. So, I mean,
I have two polar opposite mailmen that come to our house. And when I was working from home for a bit, I saw it. Like, one guy, he will walk up to like our curb and just toss the record like a frisbee to our door. And then I have another one that sees like when stuff is coming from overseas, and he'll actually like knock at like 6 something in the morning to hand it to me. Or he'll like put it behind our like storm door, so when I come home I open it and it's there. So shout out to that guy, because I love him. He's amazing.
I mean, you should get him a Christmas present this year.
I know.
think.
Buy him a record.
Nice little gift card,
Yeah.
something in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
Yeah, we have gotten more complaints certainly about shipping things, you know, taking longer, but also not as much care being given by the you know, in transit. Our mail order people are rock stars and are always, you know, looking for ways to improve the packing, and I think do an excellent job. But certainly as they've gotten complaints about, you know, things sitting around for longer, they always take that into consideration and have made changes to make sure the packing is even more robust than it may have been in the past. Yeah.
I guess I have one last question. And I mean, this is like a global question, because we are experiencing unprecedented heat, which is like where we kind of started our whole conversation, being that I am ill-equipped to deal with living in Toronto. I am so uncomfortable all of the time. This heat and humidity is not it for me. But has that affected you guys down chain? I mean, Jen, I know like you guys have had issues with like in the wintertime, and like now with records hanging out for maybe a little bit of time. Like what kind of issues are we dealing with just with climate change and with the way that the North America is getting hammered on with heat right now?
I mean, thankfully for us, most of what we do is shipping direct to, you know, fulfillment or distro or the label itself. So our things are packed and should be pretty safe in transit. The only time we really see issues is if the carrier decides to rebuild a pallet or take it apart or stack it, which we say not to do everywhere. So those are the only times that we, you know, really have to deal much with shipping. But, you know, test pressings do ship, you know, in frustration-free mailers, and sometimes, you know, those could sit out. So we try to make sure everybody knows when those are going so they can accept them and not have them sitting in the heat.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't heard too many complaints recently. That doesn't mean they aren't out there, but they may just have not made it to me. But about things being, you know, experiencing like whole shipments of warped records because they've sat too long in the heat. It's certainly, you know, I'm sure that our mail order people get emails all the time about people receiving records that, you know, sat too long.
Right.
Yeah, it's too hot. It's just so hot everywhere.
So hot.
Awful.
But yeah, it doesn't seem to be an enormous issue for us.
That's good. I mean,
that's
good.
lucky.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I'm always kind of wondering about, because having been in the factory situation, I was like, oh, it's really, 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 really uncomfortably hot in here. And now it's really hot outside too. And then things freeze. And Karen was sharing with us when things were so cold that they had to just like stop working because they like couldn't go in because pipes broke and stuff. So it's a horror show on both sides, but
it's just another instance of, you know, just goes to show there are so many things that go into making records and getting them out to people. And I wish that everybody understood that it's not one person, one plant, one label, you know, trying to gum things up for you.
I think that's the perfect place to end. Like, that's exactly why this podcast exists. So we're just that's it. That you did it right there. That's the t-shirt wrap.
Wow, this is awesome though. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
so much.
Yeah, thank you both.
You're the best. We're glad that you had some time for us.
It was my pleasure.
Hopefully we'll see you next year in person.
I hope so.
Whatever Making Vinyl extravaganza we decide to have.
Yes.
Awesome.
Oh.
Thanks so much, Katy.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thanks, you guys, for joining us for another episode, another incredible tech talk in the Women in Vinyl podcast. This has been episode 12? Yeah. With the incredible Katy Clove from Merge Records. We want to say a big, huge thank you to our buddies over at 30 Tigers and the wonderful Liz Cooper for their use of their song, Hot Sass. Because why? We're in heat wave, baby. So, Hot Sass. And that's pretty fitting, considering our podcast too. Enjoy that one. The Women in Vinyl store is live at womeninvinyl.com/store. Check it out. Get a pin or a button, maybe a bitch and slip mat. As always, join in our conversation on Instagram or send us a note at media@womeninvinyl.com. Check out the womeninvinyl.com blog for all of the episodes and amazing archive of interviews. This podcast was produced by ourselves because it's our podcast, not yours. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and give us a review on your favorite podcast delivery method. Maybe recommend it to somebody that collects records or you want to collect records. You can also contribute to furthering our mission at patreon.com/womeninvinyl, where you'll find all the B-sides, deep cuts, and amazing extras, and help us start a not-for-profit to further the demystification, education, and infiltration of more women and non-binary identifying humans into the vinyl making space. As always, keep it analog, friends. Bye.
This episode has been brought to you by Women in Vinyl and Red Spade Records. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, and you can always contact us directly by visiting www.womeninvinyl.com.